Hello, I'm Valerie Estelle Frankel, and I thought I'd start us off with some stories for the first holiday of the year, Rosh Hashana. This one I'm adapting from Zlata the Goat and Other Stories by Isaac Bashevis Singer. It's an old favorite of mine, and I read this story, adapted for Rosh Hashana, as it is now, to a group of children the night before my bat mitzvah. All right, off we go. Chelm is a very silly town where people will believe everything and anything. So this was the story of a Shlemiel, which means fool. Except this was such a big fool that in fact everybody called him Shlemiel, only that. He had a wife, Mrs. Shlemiel, and he had a baby, little Shlemiel. However, they were very, very poor, because he could never stick with a job. He was lazy, he was slobby, he always got things wrong, and he always lost his job. So his wife, Mrs. Shlemiel, had to go out and sell vegetables in the market every day, and that was all they had to live off of. Now, Mrs. Shlemiel knew that her husband was very lazy and loved sweets, so she had bought a small pot of honey for Rosh Hashana. But before she left the house, she went to Shlemiel and said, "Before I leave, I have 3 very important things I need you to do while I'm gone." "All right, what are they?" he said. "First of all, don't let the baby fall out of his cradle and get a bump on his head." "Yes, yes," said Shlemiel, "I will take care of the baby." "Second, don't let the rooster run away." "Yes," said Shlemiel, "I'll make sure the rooster stays in the house." "Third," said Mrs. Shlemiel, "I have bought us a small pot of poison. Make sure you don't eat it. It's over there on the top shelf." Because she knew if Shlemiel tasted the honey, he would eat it all up. So if she told him it was poison, he would leave it alone. "Of course," said Shlemiel. "That's easy. I won't eat the poison." So off Mrs. Shlemiel went to market. Shlemiel sat there and rocked the baby in his cradle for a while, and then he fell asleep and dreamed a great dream where he was so rich that he could eat all the holiday honey cakes he wanted with almonds and raisins and pile them up in a pile as tall as his house. In the midst of his dream, he heard the rooster crowing. And as it went cock-a-doodle-doo, it sounded like a loud bell. Now in Chelm, when somebody rang a bell, it meant there was a fire. So Shlemiel leapt up out of his chair to see if there was possibly a fire outside. In fact, he leapt up so quickly that he turned over the cradle, and the baby fell out of it and bumped his head on the floor and started crying. "Oh no," Shlemiel thought, but since he was already at the window, he opened it up to see if there was a fire. And what do you know? The rooster hopped out the window and flapped off down the street. "Oh no!" Shlemiel cried again. He turned away, picked up the baby, hugged him, comforted him, calmed him down, sang to him, finally put him back in his cradle. But there, on his forehead, even as the baby calmed down, was a big red bump. "Oh no," Shlemiel said. "The baby has a bump on his head. The rooster ran away. Mrs. Shlemiel is going to come home, and she is going to scream and scream and scream and scream and scream. What could I possibly do? You know what? I'd rather be dead." And he looked up, and what did he see up on the shelf? But a small pot of poison. "Perfect," he said to himself. He took out a spoon, opened the jar, and tasted it. "Oh my," he said, "this poison tastes delicious, but that's better than poison that tastes terrible." And he spooned it all up and ate every single drop and licked the pot for good measure. Now after this he started to feel very thirsty, and he looked around. To get water in the town of Chelm, you had to take a bucket and go walk to the well and haul up the water from the bottom of the well and then carry the heavy, heavy bucket all the way back home. Now Shlemiel, as I said, was lazy and really didn't want to do that. Up on another shelf, he spied a bottle of apple cider that his wife was saving for the holiday. Apple cider was expensive, but what was the point of saving money if you were about to die in minutes? So he pulled down the bottle of apple cider and he drank every single drop. Now, having drunk a whole bottle of apple cider and eaten a whole pot of honey, he started to get a stomach ache, and he lay down, certain now that clearly the poison was working and he was going to die. He fell asleep and had a longer, more fascinating dream with even more piles of honey cake everywhere and bottles of apple cider and all the treasures in all the realm, because he was so rich and happy and wise. Then he heard a thump as Mrs. Shlemiel opened the door. "Shlemiel, why is it dark? Why didn't you light the lamp?" she demanded. She lit the lamp, and then he heard her looking around. "Where's the rooster?" she burst out. "And oi, the baby has a bump on his head. How could you let this happen? Shlemiel, what have you done?" "Quiet, wife," said Shlemiel. "I'm dying. You're soon going to be a widow." "What do you mean dying? You look fine. You look perfectly healthy." "Ah," said Shlemiel, "but I've eaten your pot of poison." And he pointed at the empty honey jar and next to it the empty bottle of apple cider. "That wasn't poison," she burst out. "That was honey for the holiday. I told you that so you wouldn't eat it, and now you've eaten every last drop, and you drank the apple cider too. What are we going to have to eat for the holiday?" And she burst into loud sobs. Shlemiel started crying as well, not because he was so upset, but because he had just realized that he was going to live. And all this crying woke the baby, and he burst out crying too. Now, as you might expect, the neighbors came running to see what the fuss was all about, and as they listened to them all crying and heard this story, each one of the neighbors donated just a few drops of honey into the pot, enough to give them a full pot of honey for the holiday, and a few drops of apple cider into their jug, enough that they could all celebrate. The rooster got cold and came back, the baby's bump healed, and the family had a happy holiday after all, even though the father was absolutely a complete Shlemiel.